The story that we hear this morning is one where Jesus affirms God's abundance. It's a story where we are reminded that in the context, whatever context we come to the world in, that there is enough for everyone. Enough love, enough food, enough care. But it's somehow and how those things are shared and distributed among us that we mix it up, we mess it up. If we can have the first slide, and I have a number of slides, and I'll just go through them, and it's more to help you follow along. There is enough food for everyone in the world. We don't acknowledge that very often. And much of the question that I want to address today is around why it is there can be an abundance of food so that there is 12 baskets left over, and yet 1 in 7 people go hungry every day. 7.5 billion people in the world, 1 in 7 are hungry every day. Next slide. There are many signs of the food breakdown that we're conscious of at a very simple level. And we're going to talk a little bit more of those. But one of the first ones is that we live in a world where obesity and hunger live side by side. And it's not people in North America and people in South America or Africa. It's literally in our own town. And even more so in our country and in this part of the world, where there are those who have more than enough and those who don't have enough. There's different numbers floated around. I heard recently, I think it's 1/3 of grade 5, 6 students in Los Angeles suffer from obesity. That we live in a world, and not because we have too much, but because our relationship with food is so confused. The other thing is that's been in the news lately is this whole XL Meats thing. I saw Rick Mercer's rant about it, and I think, if I'm correct, he said that at XL Meats they have to process 6 cows a minute to get your head around what is involved in the production of industrial meat. 6 cows a minute, like from being alive to being wrapped in cellophane. It's quite frightening. Next slide, please. This is the part that I learned, or I guess I didn't realize before when I looked into this week. 80% of those people who I mentioned who will be going hungry today are producers of food. Either farmers, primarily farmers, or fishers. Or people who are involved in the distribution of food. 80% of the 1 in 7 are involved in the production of food. And they go to bed hungry. It struck me that as Jesus met with those people on the side of the hill, he said, this question about the food. His followers primarily were peasants, primarily were farmers who were also hungry most days because the food that they produced was collected through taxes by Rome and by their own leadership in their own country. Times have not changed that much in that way. Next slide. One of the things, and we're going to look at some of the reasons for this, one of the reasons is that in developing countries, corporations can easily buy up land, either for forestry but also for industrial agriculture. We had an experience of this back in 1980. Pearl and I were in Haiti. And, people were very hungry there. We were there for 4 months, and everyone was always hungry there. There was never enough food, it seemed. And we would go, we were out driving one day, and we came to this huge pastured area that looked like perfect farming land. Huge flat deltas of rich soil. And there were cattle grazing on it. And it seemed strange because they don't eat beef in Haiti very much. Goat, a little bit of pork, lots of fish, if they're having any kind of protein that way. In fact, they asked Pearl and I to teach them to cook Canadian food. And we said, well, what's Canadian food? And they said, well, fudge and steak. So we taught a home ec class at a vocational school on how to make fudge and steak. None of them will ever make steak, I'm sure, because they just don't eat it. So I said to Father Bruno, who was driving the car we were in, I said, look at all this land, look at all these cattle, what's going on? You know, why aren't they farming that? So that's all been bought by McDonald's. Every one of those cows is exported to North America for us to eat. That is happening all around the world, where large corporations can go in, where there are people who are, where governments are stretched to meet world, their global loans, and so they will sell land, and they will be managed by the World Bank into selling lands and raising funds to pay down debt. And one of the big ways they do it is to sell off the land that might have had 100 subsistence farmers living on it to large industrial food corporations. Next slide. The other thing is that food is now traded as commodity. Just like people buy shares in gold, people buy shares in wheat or corn. And what that does is artificially drive the price up. Because the issue is not what the value of this product is. The issue is how do shareholders get money out of their investment. So if I've invested in wheat, to me I have a big investment in that wheat becoming more valuable, more expensive. And of course that means that the subsistence farmer, or those who have been, their land has been taken up by a food corporation, can't afford to buy the wheat they're growing. Next slide. Right now, 3 agricultural corporations own 90% of the grain trade in the world. 3 companies. The whole world, all but 10% of the wheat. All of it. So it's not exactly a monopoly, but it makes it pretty easy to manage those prices and to demand kind of concessions from governments around how that is produced and what happens to it. And of course, their agenda will keep the price high. Next slide. Now 1/3 of all corn produced is sold for biofuels, which initially I think a lot of us were very excited. We won't have to mine oil anymore. We can use biofuels. But what it means is it's driven the price of corn so high that many people can't afford it. And it means that those who previously grew corn to eat are now under incredible pressure to sell it for biofuel rather than in the markets or other places where people might eat it. Next slide. This is also the line in the passage. Jesus says to Philip, go around with the baskets and gather up anything that's left over so it's not wasted. You know, that had never jumped out at me as much this week, as much as it did this week before. Don't let any be wasted. 1/3 of the food produced globally is wasted. 1/3. I mean, I can't get my head around it, but if you start to think about it, in wealthy countries, of course, we know they throw out food from grocery stores and restaurants and institutions and individuals regularly. Some places have developed gleaning processes where the leftover food at the end of the night at a restaurant or at a grocery store at the end of the week, food banks or people who need it can come and get it. But that's a very rare thing right now because of fears around lawsuits, right? If I let you come in and get the chicken at the end of the day that's best before was yesterday, and you get sick, there's a great deal of fear about being sued. But so 1/3 of the food is wasted. I was surprised to find out 1/3 of the food produced in developing countries is also wasted for totally different reasons. Mainly bad infrastructure and transportation. So it means that when the harvest comes in a poor place, you don't have anywhere to store it. So you've got to take whatever price is being offered at the time. And if there's a glut in the market, which there often is at harvest time, it means that the food rots where it is. Or because there's no way, the cost of getting it from the developing country to North America or Western Europe or some other part of the world is so much that it isn't worth shipping, so it rots where it is. And of course, even if you're hungry most of the year, you can't eat a whole bunch at harvest and last through the year, so it's wasted there. I was so thinking about this on the other day. I bought a pineapple, and I love pineapple. Not the kind in the can, pineapple. We have a really cool tool we got. You can screw it down in and pop it out. Isn't this great? $2.39 for a pineapple. Awesome, eh? How is that possible? I have to start asking that question. How is that possible? Next slide. One of the big factors in food production, of course, now is climate change. Drought, floods, erratic weather patterns. It makes it really hard for farmers to know when to plant, what to plant, and how to plant at this time in the world. Indigenous cultures that have had successful agriculture for years are having all kinds of havoc wreaked on their harvests because they can't predict the weather. It isn't what they know what it is. Next slide. Of course, rising cost of fuel related to transportation means that our whole world food networking is going to be is already being disrupted. I mean, the time getting my pineapple to Extra Foods is not what it used to be in terms of the cost of that. Next slide. Also related to climate change, but also population growth and the way things are. Since 1960, half the arable land in the world has been lost. Half. Largely to climate change, areas that have become deserts, droughts as a result. Next slide. Availability of fresh water. 70% of all fresh water goes to agriculture, and we're, in our part of the world, we're not immediately aware of it, but we're certainly aware through the news that water is becoming increasingly more valuable than oil, and the demand for it and the wars that will be fought over it are many. Next slide. Population growth, wealth in countries like China and India particularly, where with wealth comes a desire for more meat protein, and we know that it takes more out of the land, out of the earth, to produce meat than it does to produce vegetable protein. Next slide. So I want to get a little bit to what we can do, because I have my pineapple, but I need to look at that and think about it. The first thing I think we need to do is to recognize having enough to eat is a human right. It is not a privilege for some that is denied to others. It's a way of thinking that we have to change. That everyone having enough to eat is a human right, a basic human right, like having enough air to breathe. We need to support fair trade products wherever we can. We have a dilemma about this in town, in that there's only a very few fair trade products you can get your hands on. Coffee beans at our house has been a bit of an issue, because if you buy fair trade coffee beans in the grocery store, they're not ground. And so I have to go and pressure the guys at Rumors to grind them for me. They would rather I bought their coffee. Supporting ecological practices, looking at farm practices that are more sustainable. I mean, one of the things with the corporate industrial approach to agriculture is a huge amount of inputs of GMOs, chemicals, and those sorts of things, which initially provide a really high yield initially, but over time destroys the very land that you're growing it on. Next slide. Buy in season when we can. I mean, everyone says the 100-mile diet's the way to go. Anyone here want to go for that? I like moose and berries and fish, but I like pineapples too. I think we have to practice where we are culturally, but to look at where can we get food in ways that are seasonal. Like if in the fall there's a lot of apples on the market, have a look on it and see, did they come from Mexico or did they come from, Ontario? That's one of the things we can do is look at how we can, by buying local, we send a message as much as we can by buying close and things in season. we need as a community, as a global community, to focus on food quality and distribution, and we need to look at waste. And we can begin in our homes, of course. I mean, some of you may have done during the week, and if you didn't, there's copies on the back table. The waste, you keep track of your waste for a week, and you look at how can we change that. Individual homes will probably not make the biggest difference, but as we practice it, then we can begin to imagine beyond our homes how we can do that. Next slide. I think in many ways it's about changing our ways of thinking about food, thinking about how we are part of that network. So we begin to ask the question, where was this food grown? This is my pineapple. Where was this food grown? Where was this pineapple grown? Who grew it? How much were they paid? How was it grown? Is it grown in a big industrial farm? And am I paying really enough for it? I mean, my guess is that if the farmer was actually fairly paid, and it was grown in a way that transportation, wasn't always far away, buying it out of season or something, it would probably be worth more like $6. Are we willing to do that? Are we willing to do that with an understanding that having enough food is a human right? We're willing to say, we'll pay more for our food. All fall, I've been hearing about this, food prices are going to go up 2%. I'm like, seriously? The amount we as Canadians spend on food is ridiculous. It is so inexpensive to buy food in Canada relative to other parts of the world. I think probably we're going to have to adapt to the price going up a little bit. And probably that'll also mean less pre-prepared food. I mean, that's a huge part of the cost. We often pay more for the preparation than for the product. I think there's another one there. Nope. So this is our context. Wednesday was World Food Day in the United Nations, and people mark that in different ways around the world. And I think it's important for us from time to time to, especially in places like Marathon, we become very, we have a small world because we're cut off from the larger world a lot of the time. And so I think it's important for us when we eat, when we sit down to a meal, to be thinking about these things, be thinking about the global village that we're part of. A global village where 1 in 7 of us will go to town to go to bed hungry tonight. Imagine in Marathon, if you knew someone was going to bed hungry tonight, you'd want to reach out to them. Well, our neighbors are all around the world, and as Jesus says, there is enough for everyone. And that our first response, of course, is gratitude. Our first response is to give thanks for God's abundance. And I invite you to offer now signs of your gratitude, both in the food you brought today and the money you'll present now, the sign of your commitment to God's abundance and to sharing it in the